Mr. Chair, is that the board side or okay over here? Or is that the committee side? Okay.
We're the observers.
I'm an observer, yes. I'm not a member of this. I can't vote. You're not going to have a majority of the board.
Sorry?
You can see us okay?
Yeah.
I think you should make that clear, Mr. Chairman, that the chair and vice chair here are not ex officio as observers. If we can comment, but we can't vote because we don't want to have a majority of the board sitting here.
Mr. Mayor, as I told the other members, this is now broadcasting live, including audio.
I assume so. The text.
Is this your talking about?
No, that's mine. So you flip over that one, you'll have the chart of the key services and the media policy where the language is, that we have is very similar to those are under media policy, and then the code where it has checked off code of conduct.
Your resolution.
Is there an extra folder?
Those are the ones that currently do not have media policies, or they rely, they're silent and they rely on the Police Services Act.
Is it in here?
Yeah, I got this one, but I don't have that one. Let me see that this.
Can I give you one?
I will.
Can I give you one? No.
You going NDP, Fred?
What's that?
Are you going NDP?
I'm going Can-Am. Can-Am orange, buddy.
Oh.
That's right.
Is that different from NDP orange?
You
know what? I got it.
As opposed to Dutch orange, which I'm more aligned to.
Oh, is Dutch orange?
Yes.
Dutch, yeah. The Prince, when I did the 0202 wedding for the Dutch Royal couple, I still have my orange bow tie for the reception.
I must say they're comfy.
You know, of all the, when I'm in Holland, I feel like I'm in Canada.
Why?
It's very similar. It's very a smaller version of us. When you're in the Netherlands, I don't know how many times you've been there, but the people are very much the same. You know, we're multicultural. They're multicultural.
Oh, yeah, from that perspective, sure.
Yeah, no, it's. I'm not talking about like you know the geography, but the culture is very similar.
Yeah, not radically different.
It was
Well, you have the original policy that went to the board?
Yes, I do.
Can we have copies again?
Yeah, that's the only document I received for it.
So maybe I didn't.
Makes
I thought I
sense.
had. I sent it to everybody else.
Oh, okay.
Can you give it to me? I'll make copies of it.
Cherry's stand coming.
The
He's
original.
on his way.
Yes, he's 50
Policy
minutes.
that went to the board.
He's 50 minutes
You did?
away.
You could have seen away yet.
One time. Well, that was 5-6 minutes ago.
Okay.
So, yeah, the meeting's delayed. There's actually 3 on the governance subcommittee, myself,
We're going to save one for Stan, right?
Wayne, or Walter, and Stan Tick. And Stan did do some due diligence and some work on his own proposal, and so it's probably it's with merit that we should wait for, if we can, for Stan for the next 10 minutes to, even though we have quorum of the committee, I think it's pretty profound that we don't have him here, especially after he did some of his own due diligence. You got a copy?
Yeah, I think this is good. Like, it's happened here.
You want me copies of it?
No, we have it. The copies are already in.
Oh.
Good, I gave you one. It's right there.
I would have to see it.
Madeline, are these your glasses?
I'll just
probably is.
15 minutes to come back. There you go.
All right.
So Fred, I figured out how to use this thing now, Freddie.
You got the new one, eh?
If you use the silence meetings, it'll ring for you in the car, ring for you walking the halls, but if it's during the time you have a meeting in your calendar, it'll flip from ring to vibrate.
Oh, wow.
As soon as that meeting time is over, it'll bring, and alert you going off, meeting silence.
Which one is that? Is that the third?
Classic.
It's often I put mine in vibrate, never feel the vibrate, and I
I
get
know, you don't feel
that and ring, so
It's,
what happens?
it's, what do you mean it's a
It's off.
classic? It's got a keyboard on it?
Mine's always on.
Yeah.
But I just don't ever have it ring during council meeting.
Yours always goes up.
No, not mine, same.
I couldn't figure out how to turn it off right. Fred did it for me.
This is- This is the 30.
That's right.
Totally different than that one.
It was on me.
I like the keyboard though. My big fat farmer figures, I can't type on those screen things.
Yeah.
You get used to it.
I can't imagine how Robert Pursuit could possibly do either. No. Those big mitts of his.
Well, I think he does it with voice recognition. You guys have, there's a decent,
I got that in the car.
no, but on the BlackBerry voice recognition is better than the iPhone.
Yeah.
I noticed, at least mine, I can actually make sentences out of it.
These events like you.
Well, you can't
Yeah, I can actually respond to my text messages and my emails while I'm driving locally.
But you're looking down and set that all up.
No, it does it automatically. I can do it through my sim. You have to drive a Ford, not that Cadillac. That's going to get you in trouble.
Yeah, what?
You got to drive a Ford. That Cadillac's going to get you in trouble.
I think it worked great. Push the button. Call Walt. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, but you can't. It won't read you your text messages.
I bet your car doesn't have the feature where you're, because I get thinking and I lose track of what I'm doing. If I get too close to the car in front of me, it'll slow the car down. And eventually I'll apply the brakes if I don't react. And if you're shifting to the left, it vibrates the left side of your seat. If you're shifting to the right, it vibrates the right side of the seat.
I got that.
You got that?
Yeah.
I use that all the time.
Ford had that a long time ago.
I think,
Where do you think Cadillac got it from?
do you have it, if you're backing up and you get too close, it'll slam the brakes on?
I don't know. I'll have to look at it. My new.
It's a real problem in your trailer. You forget about it, you start to back up and it slams the brakes on towards the end of the
Yeah, that's not a good thing. But you should be able to.
Yeah, you push the button, you gotta remember to do that.
Yeah.
So I saw on the radio, or listened to the radio, and they were saying that that automatic system, I don't know if it's the Toyotas or whatever, but you get chain link fences and whatever, it'll hit off the sensor and the car will brake automatically.
Yeah.
So it's picking up other signals that, I guess, activates the brakes.
I don't know. I have millions of copies.
I'll need a couple more.
Hey, Andrew. I like the shepherd sheep. Now, perfect. I've used that. I don't know how many times when I spoke to our people and we're trying to motivate different people, but that is, that nails it. The Middle Eastern version of it would be goats, but sheep is good. It's excellent.
We're here, the Governance Committee for the Services Board. We're here primarily to discuss new information, or all the information as it pertains to the media policy. There was a resolution of the board to send it back to get and garner more information. There's been packets sent, given to everybody. There's a chart included in that package that reflects, if you read the preamble before, it basically reflects the organizations that currently have media policies and have a similar language. That's that very clause. And the ones that don't, including Hamilton, as we don't have a media policy at this point, we rely on the code of conduct. So you'll see that Durham, Hamilton, and Halton rely on the Police Services Act. It's silent, and the balance of it are the ones that got the exact same language. So that's the chart that gives you information, and also included in the package is in fact all the media policies for those particular police services. Secondly, I know that Fred's done some work. He wanted to move up a process and policy on code of conduct. This means only an hour. What I had suggested, because we haven't done a due diligence, did the same degree of looking at Durham and all the other jurisdictions, that we need to do some due diligence before we just take the first one that comes across the table. But having said that, I think the discussion we had, and it'll be up to the committee and certainly when it goes to the board, that we could adopt as an interim policy and then make whatever necessary amendments to it. That would be the caveat based on that due diligence. So that covers the two areas that we're going to talk today. Stan Tech did provide some amendments that he thought and was proposing. I don't know if Lloyd, you should have it in front of you.
I got Stan's, yeah.
Yeah. So back to the original policy. That's 5.1 is the one that went in front of the board. The language that was of concern to the board members at the time was, I think, item 13. Is it? Is it? Yeah, 13. Board members may communicate a position of the board. However, should a board member publicly disagree with the position of the board, or should a board member comment upon a matter not yet before the board, she or he will clearly identify that they're speaking as an individual and not on behalf of the board. Nor shall a board member state the board has taken a position on a matter until the matter has been voted upon. So that is what was the contentious issue in front of the board. That's when a motion was forward to go back to the Governance Committee and acquire more information. And again, that information before you. And before I actually, the other thing I should mention is that in the first Governance Committee, we had some discussion whether, because it's a working group, there's no requirement for this meeting to be public. That in fact, working committees could actually work in camera. And there was some discussion. We made a decision as a board, as a vote, that we would, for that meeting, we would go into camera. But I reserved my judgment on whether or not that's the way I want to continue conducting business with the Governance Committee. So I guess the first order of business today for the committee is to decide whether this meeting should be deemed as a working group and done in camera, or whether or not it should be a public process. So at this point, and Stan's not here, but I would entertain a motion. Well, look, Stan's not here, but looking for your comments.
Well, basically, I think what was happening, Mr. Chair, is that our concern was with the expression clause of, and I think...
Oh, yeah, no, the first order of business.
The first order of business,
is the in-camera versus dealing with...
All right, so the motion is that I'd like to put forth that our working groups are open and public going forward.
Okay, and that's certainly my position. So 2 out of the 3, Stan's not here to speak, unfortunately, but I believe that also that this meeting should be done in an open forum. It is a development of policy. It is of public interest, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't have it open. So for those reasons, that's my positions. Now, I would go to any other comments, but again, just remind to the media that we do have a number of board members here that are here as observers. They can and will participate in the discussion, but the actual vote is going to be the members of the governance committee. So at this point, is there any further discussion?
So, based on your kind of new comments this morning, the governance committee reports to what?
The board.
Right. So you're making a recommendation this morning that you want the board to make a decision. So your motion today, God bless you for it, is to recommend to the board that we in the future have all working groups be public meetings from here to full.
No, I think the discussions of the governance committee, because it's development policy, it's not confidential information, would be done in open.
No, I hear what you're suggesting, though, but I don't understand what our current policy is.
There isn't.
Lois, what's our current policy then?
Past practice.
Working groups and subcommittees.
Past practice for working groups, the board really didn't form any subcommittees in the past. When they held meetings just to work on budget or bargaining, they were never a public open meeting, and they were working groups and weren't minuted or anything that came out of those meetings would go back to the board as a recommendation to the full board, not at that working group.
Mm-hmm. So that's past practice, not a policy per se. So are we making a policy decision today that the board needs to reflect on and decide on, in your mind?
I would say yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, to be fair, I mean, there's a change here in terms of practice, and I'm not here to argue whether it's a good thing or bad thing, but I think the board needs to reflect on that. I'm not so sure that it's a governance committee decision that it can make unto itself, just to be technical about it. I think the board needs to be the final arbiter of that. I have no problem with that, but I think the board needs to have a go at that. So I'm sure you're not suggesting that the governance committee can decide on its own what its kind of future governing policies are going to be.
Just for clarity in that, I don't think any committee makes any final decision. It's only recommendations to the board. Correct. And I think you would agree with that, would you not, Jerry? This motion is a recommendation to the board where the ultimate decision will be made.
Is there any further discussion?
Well, I think when the committee was formed, Mr. Chair and Mr. Chair and Mr. Mayor, there were 6 people that agreed, that were board members, that agreed at that particular time. So we literally had board quorum that we would actually have this in open session. This is where I'm confused. I'm confused that when we created the governance committee, there was quite a bit of debate over whether it would be open or closed or in camera or out of camera, and then this debate continues. So that's where I'm confused. I was always under the understanding that I was under the understanding as a member of the governance subcommittee of this board that this would be always an open, out of camera session. Thank you.
So just to finish, so you fully well realize that most members that are coming this morning were expecting a working session, not necessarily a public session. I don't have any difficulty doing this in public. You're suggesting that the governance committee can decide on its own whether it wants to be public or not public. I don't think that's correct technically. I think the board ultimately decides. So just to work through the technicality of where we are right now, I don't think you're authorized to make a fundamental change in terms of how you operate until the board makes that final determination. So just on that point, I don't have any difficulty doing it public, but I think if you're suggesting here this morning that you can just arbitrarily make a change, I don't think that's correct.
Just to that,
Okay, so, and I guess my counterpart, I'll have to pass the chair over to Walter. My counter is that currently the language is silent. I believe that this is the first time we've actually set up a formal standing committee on the governance. Past practice doesn't dictate, so where it is silent and the board hasn't taken a position, I believe that the subcommittee has the ability to make that decision, and if in fact it's an issue of the board, then it certainly can be discussed at the board, but there's nothing that says right now that we can't do it or we can do it. So at this point the decision has to be rendered. In absence of having any formal decision, for the purpose of this meeting, I think we need to have an open session, and then if the board desires to have further discussion of whether this governance committee should be in camera, out camera, that would be rightly placed at the board to have that discussion debate. But for the purpose of this meeting, because there's absence of policy, there's absence of a position either way, I don't think we really have any other choice. So those are my comments. Stan, you just arrived, welcome.
Well, I just arrived. At 10:31 I received a notice of the meeting, and I got here as quickly as I could. I don't particularly enjoy getting notice of a meeting for 10:30 at 10:31. And I don't even know what the discussion is about, because I just walked in the door.
Okay. So just on that,
what is the purpose of this meeting as we speak?
Yeah, just on that, Lois, did we not notify the board, the governance board meeting? Do we?
I notified the board of the meeting.
Okay, so when did that notification go out?
Thursday, June 18th.
There's a flurry of confusing emails.
Anyway, so the notice went out. Obviously, everyone else is here, so everyone else is aware of it. So if there's a better way, or if there's a challenge, we can certainly address that. So I just want to address that point. The second piece, Stan, to just bring it to where we're at. When I started off the discussion, primarily the reason for the meeting was to deal with the media policy. It was sent back to this particular governance committee to get more information. There should be a package in front of you. There's a chart that reflects where Clause 13 is consistent with a number of the identified services on the form. So Toronto, Ottawa, Niagara, Waterloo, Halton, York, Peel, and then the ones that don't either have a media policy or don't have this clause and rely on the code of conduct is Hamilton, Durham, and Halton. And then
Point of order, Mr. Chair. So you said earlier on that someone was putting forward a motion that heretofore there were going to be public meetings on the working group, this particular working group. Correct? That's a motion that Mr. Kucinich put forward.
Yeah, I'm just standing to arrive, so I'm just trying to bring him, because he asked what this meeting's about, so I'm just trying to bring him up to speed. I was trying to answer his question.
Okay.
It's nice to know what it's about.
And so that's primarily what the meeting is called to do, the media policy. Having said that, Stan, you have done some due diligence yourself and sent a copy of what you felt was amendments that should be considered. That is before us as part of this discussion.
Right.
And lastly, the mayor had brought in a sample of code of conduct from Toronto that he would hope that we would consider. The discussion was, one, we table it because that's not what we're here for. We're to build the media policy. Or two, we adopt it in term because we haven't done the due diligence in regards to the comparators. Either way, it'll be up to the committee to decide that issue. So that's just to bring up to speed. Right now we're discussing the issue, and as you know, we had that discussion last time, and we did go into camera, but there was some discussion around whether these meetings should be done in open session or in closed session. And I reserved that judgment as if for that meeting that we would go in camera, and we did. After thinking about it, thinking about the items we're dealing with, and as a public interest, it's certainly my position that it should be maintained in public. So currently, Walter's indicated that he supports keeping this public. Mr. The mayor argued that is there a policy? There isn't any. Was it past practices? Well, it gave some examples of the negotiations and budget, which in most cases would be in camera anyway. But this is a policy, and this is of public interest. So that's where we are in this sort of discussion, and now I'll turn it over to you to participate in the discussion of being in camera or out of camera.
It's a committee meeting. It's a committee meeting. It's not a meeting of the board. And it's a committee working meeting to make a presentation to the board to decide on whether or not the form of the media policy should be. And that is for the board to discuss, and whether that's discussed in open meeting or that's discussed in closed meeting, the committee itself is a private committee to report to the board. Therefore, it should be in camera because it's a committee, a working group. It's not a board decision-making group. It's the group that presents the policy to the board for consideration. If we're to do our job, then we have to have the opportunity to do our job and say what we have to say and deal with it, and then bring it to the board, and when the board gets it, they make a ruling on it, and what their ruling is what stands. And whether the discussions are in private or not, the media policy itself is in public, because it's the media policy for our board and how we conduct ourselves. And I understand one of the things that we discussed is the fact that the chair speaks for the board, and the vice chair, in the absence of the chair, speaks for the board, and no one speaks for the board other than that person, unless you have a position different from what the board's position is. And then you're allowed to use the phrase, in my personal opinion, which seems to be...
Okay, so Stan, getting into the actual substance of the debate right now, the discussion is in camera, out camera. Yeah, you've already made your argument on that. Is there any further comments on the in-camera versus out camera?
Normally I get a chance to speak.
Well, I'm just saying that we're going to get into the substance of the debate right now. What's on the floor right now, the topic...
It's a committee, and if it's a committee, it should be a private meeting.
Okay.
That's the purpose of committee, so we can get our work done and then make a presentation that's voted on.
So I'm going to ask Walt to take the chair again, and I would say that a governance committee is a standing committee. It's dealing with, it's not dealing with confidential work. I'm going to ask Lois specifically, is there any policy or any requirement for this meeting to stay in camera?
I would have to research that, Terry. We do have a procedural bylaw.
I think we asked that
Yes,
question
speak
before,
on.
and you did respond to us and said there's nothing that prevents it from being in camera or out of camera.
Nothing prevents it in
Out of camera.
as a public meeting. However, under the Police Services Act, when you're having a public meeting, it must be publicized that you're having a public meeting
Yeah.
so far in advance of that meeting.
Yeah.
Is this going to?
Yes, it was. I sent it out. I sent it out to me, and that's where we have the meeting. Come on, the chair.
So that's another issue. We don't even have a terms of reference, a frame of reference. We're a committee. We don't have a guiding principle. We don't have any of that. So, those are the kinds of things. I mean, I didn't know in advance of this that who was going to be here. We were quibbling about times and dates. And, nothing was really, and then all of a sudden there was a note that came on, well, we're going to meet at this time. People said they weren't available or not available. So, I think we need to look at a frame of reference for how a committee is structured and what its mandate is, and how you select people and all of that. So that's not even in place.
I agree with all those comments. The issue is that we currently don't have a position of the board. We
So it's a working group.
currently don't have, well, I mean, the governance committee is actually a standing committee of most organizations, period. And whether it's, you know, councillors or other boards, governance committee is a standing committee.
Do they have mandates?
Accounting committee is a standing committee. And the point I made earlier is that for the purpose of this meeting, and absent of anything preventing it from being open, and absent of any policies, it's just you can't do it. And in absence of any compelling argument that public information regarding policy development shouldn't be just discussed in a public forum, I'm having a challenge to make a, you know, to come aside and say, let's just have this discussion in camera. Now, I did say that it would be the purview of the board. So at the end of the day, if the board takes a position when the report goes back, that the standing committee should be only working as a working group in camera, that would be in the purview of the board, and I would respect the decision of the board. But that's a discussion, debate that will take place at the board. Currently, we don't have that. We don't have that. What's the word I'm looking for? We don't have that on. We don't have anything that's set. So currently, as a chair, I have to take the position, which has always been consistent, that this should be an open session until I have something that directs me that we can't do it, we shouldn't do it, or a board direction that says we can't do it. So at this point, that's my position, and at this point, I'm going to put it to a vote.
Yes.
So all in favor of having this discussion in open session, just put your hand up, I guess. And those against?
Well, I'm not in favor of having an open session, and I'm not in favor of having a decision made until it's been approved by the board. Because you're making a decision for the board without knowing what the board's position is. That's what you're saying, and I think that usurps the function of the board in the name of being the chairman of the committee for governance, for the media policy, and we're discussing the media policy, which hasn't been approved yet, and until it's approved, it shouldn't be discussed in public.
So I appreciate and respect that stand. I think the argument's been made, so we're looking for a vote.
Well, what does my vote mean if the two of you have decided, without having any jurisdiction from the board to make this decision, which is a board decision as you've said, then how do you, as a two-person majority of a group that I seem to be in the minority, you're deciding for the board what their decision is, and you don't know what it is yet. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I appreciate your arguments.
I'm glad you do.
I think respectfully, the fact that when it was set up, it was never determined if those discussions should be in camera, out of camera. The board had the opportunity to do that. They didn't. Now it's an issue, fine. But I'm constrained by the fact that there is nothing that restricts it being in the open. There's no board directive or question whether this should be in camera, out of camera. It's only becoming an issue now in front of the board now. And unfortunately, I don't know how I square the circle in regards to we're here now. We have the information in front of us. And we have nothing preventing us from having this discussion in open. If the board again decides at a subsequent meeting that the standing committee should be conducting all their business in camera, that will be a debate at the board and we respect the board. But for the purpose of this particular meeting, absence of any things to prevent it from happening, absence of any board directive that it should be in camera, we're stuck with the. I'm stuck with the decision that we need to have this in open session. So, while we're at the vote, I would just go ahead.
Thanks. So on the procedural bylaw basis, you mentioned, Lois, that proper notification is required for having a public meeting. And what does that kind of notification look like? Is it notification that the chair sends out a missive to the members and some media folks, or is it a much broader notification process?
It should go out to the public itself, not just to the media. It goes out to the public.
So when you say public, when you're doing it is the public at large aware that this meeting is on? I asked.
Is it on our website?
It is not on our website. Normally what happens is the board in October or November of the year prior to meetings are scheduled and approved by the board, and those meetings are set on the website for the public to view at any time. So the public at large is aware, as well as the media is aware, that those meeting dates have been scheduled. There is a provider at the bottom that says if anything changes, that people will be notified as soon as possible through the website.
So did that happen in this case?
So when we set this meeting, did it on this?
Did that happen in this case?
No, not via me. I did not send it out to media or post it on the website.
That's our normal policy, and that's kind of an approved policy of the board, that's the notification process that we go through.
It was past practice.
In-
The notice
the
of,
notification.
that has always happened.
Right, okay. So, listen, you know what, I'm okay with dealing with it. Personally, I'm okay with dealing with this in the public, but you know what, the issue here is that you have arbitrarily decided.
No, put to a
No,
vote.
you have arbitrarily decided how this process is going to unfold. And I think there was an expectation on the part of the people that were coming here to understand that this is going to be a working committee. So to be fair to the people that are here, and to be fair to the public, that if you're going to have this kind of a public meeting, that the public at large should be totally aware of the entire meeting and the process that we're evolving. So we should be sitting in council chambers. The public should be able to attend. They are not able to attend because they were not informed. So if we're going to go down this path, then it should be the fulsome approach. And that means that the public and the media are fully aware that this meeting is on and they can engage. So I would say, I know I don't want to shut down a meeting, but this was not caused by the individuals that were invited to attend. And I offered to come because I wanted to have input into the discussion that was going to be had today. But it was not a broad notification of the public. It was not a broad notification of the media at large. In fact, I don't know, I'm not sure about that because that was done through you. So I can understand the consternation of people walking into the room at this moment in time and understanding that there's a different scenario being evolved here. It's not that anyone takes particular offense to the media or that anyone's particularly afraid of the media. It's the context of which the way this was set up and the past practice that is involved in the Police Services Board. And I think it's unfair to arbitrarily change that without notifying everyone that change is about to happen. So just those comments, Mr. Chair. I think I think in your mind you're trying to do the right thing, and unfortunately you didn't notify everyone of the context of this meeting. And I think that's a bad practice. I think it's a disservice to the public, in fact, and it's a disservice to the members of the committee in terms of how we're approaching this.
Appreciate the comments. I'm going to pass the chair back to Walt and indicate that the board members had a pretty extensive discussion at the last board meeting, whether these discussions should continue, because we started an open session, by the way. So you need to have a little context. We started an open session. We had some discussion and debate whether or not the discussion be in camera. For the purposes of that first meeting, I indicated that I would respect that request, and we went into camera and had a discussion. Now, I also made it pretty clear that I had issues with it and that I would hold that under advisement. Certainly wasn't my position that we would continue in that light. But if any of the board members that attended that meeting or members of the committee had an issue with the being in camera, out of camera, they had ample time to raise that at the last board meeting. It was not. And again, I want to reflect on the fact that I made it clear that that was my position, always been my position, that these meetings should be public, and that that I had reserved my judgment, my personal judgment, my own personal position to try and accommodate the members around the table on that particular day. So I hear you on the notification piece. You're right, you're correct. So I am in a bit of dilemma because it's pretty clear that, according to Lois, that this didn't go out to the general public to notify them. So at this point, I guess that's a legitimate argument, and I'm not going to dispute that in any way. I'm just not sure where we go from here. We've got two choices as I see it. One, The discussion open or closed is it's a separate discussion. The question is whether the proper notice was given to the general public. I think I can attest that and agree that it has not. So now I'm at the mercy of the board. Do we continue having this meeting period, or we cancel the meeting altogether and seek, and we still have a board meeting, so we can now get into the debate at the board whether there should be in-camera, out-of-camera discussion, and based on that determination, we'll know in the future whether we'll need to serve the public. So I think, in fairness, I respect the argument. That is a legitimate argument. And so I'm at the mercy of the committee now on whether we should be now postponing this committee meeting. And then because of lack of notice to the public, one, and for that reason, and for the discussion on in-camera, out-of-camera, and the media policy discussion directly to the board. I think that's what's on the table.
Mr. Mayor?
So,
So, thank you.
I'll take your turn back.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, I think ultimately the decision should go to the board. I think because there hasn't been due and proper notification of members of the public, I don't think it's fair or reasonable for us to have a public meeting in the absence of that. If we were to do it at the city, we would shut the meeting down in a hurry. And so I would recommend that we not continue, that we sort out the policy issue. The board make a fundamental determination as to how their governance committee is going to operate and how we're going to procedurally then notify, depending on what that decision is. So I would say, you know, based on where we are right at this moment, I think unfortunately, I think we have no choice but to stop and rethink and get a determination from the board, and then determination as to how we're going to proceed in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to Lois. Lois, is there anything, the notification, is that under the Police Services Act and the Municipal Act?
It's under the Police Services Act. The
Okay.
Municipal Act does not.
Just out of curiosity, if this meeting kept on going for whatever reason, and let's say we're not, but are we what would we breaching, or would we be breaching anything under the Act?
Notification of the public meeting.
Okay, so that would be the breach.
What is the clause?
It's under
So under the grounds of notification clause of the Police Services Act, we would be breaching the Act on that. Okay, so that gives us our answer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just so I mean, Lois, just my question, just so I can make reference to it.
She'll find it, give her a moment.
Yeah, it's just for that reason, so we can, what's it called? The
notification.
The notification requirement.
Yeah. Just and just for the record, my motion was put in with the assumption that the proper notifications were made.
That would include everybody.
So Lois is looking for it. You're firm on that it's a legislative requirement? Lois?
I'm just.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm an observer at this point in time. Since we're not going to be dealing with the issue, I just wanted to be clear about where we are, and hopefully we can resolve this and get on with the important issue, which is resolving the meeting policy before too long. So we can reset this.
So it's section 35(3). Meetings and hearings conducted by the board shall be open to the public, subject to section 4, and notice of them shall be published in the manner that the board determines.
Okay, that's...
And then section 4 talks about the board makes...
Which page is that?
100.
Sorry?
Page 100.
And what's how much time do we have to give the public for notice in this?
That has to be determined by the board.
So if there's no determination by the board,
Whatever is determined as reasonable.
okay, but,
Yeah, so it doesn't address subcommittees, it addresses boards.
Meetings of the board.
Yeah,
but not subcommittees.
not subcommittees. Anyway,
So,
having said that,
Okay, so-
I think the principle is correct, that there should be proper notice, period, regardless of board or governance committee. So it doesn't appear to me to be a legislative requirement, but having said that, I think it's the right thing. So right now we need a motion to what would the terminology, cancel or postpone, delay,
postpone, I guess, would be a good one.
or because of lack of notice, suspend,
Adjourn.
adjourn.
So,
There's still an outstanding issue, and
And we'll forward that
I'll raise that
issue.
again.
We'll forward that issue to the board.
Right, so I think the determination needs to be made by the board. So at this point, in my mind, we cancel this meeting. The board makes a determination as to how we proceed in terms of committees and working groups from here forward. And then we reschedule this meeting once that determination's been made.
Sounds good. So all those in favor of that position, that we postpone or suspend this meeting, cancel this meeting based on lack of notice, and then forward the discussion to the board today. All those in favor? All those in favor?
Stan, you in favor?
I don't think this meeting should be taking place
We're just
in
canceling.
public. Therefore, I'm not in favor or not in favor. I don't think this meeting has been properly constituted, and I don't think it's a meeting that needs to be dealt with.
Fair enough.
So, I'm in favor. Do you abstain, Stan?
I'm in favor. So
I have no vote.
So we have two votes to send it off to the board and cancel this meeting based on lack of public notification. It's been carried. Thank you very much, and we'll carry it along with at the board. Thank you. Sorry for the inconvenience.